Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 191, Quest. I waited on the deck, enjoying the sun as I watched him approach. It turned out Kickle was overly optimistic in his estimation on how long it would take to return. And when he finally did return, I noticed he was returning alone. Kickle stumbled his way down the rickety pier. The jerboa was plastered by the looks of him, but he still managed to jump from the dock to the deck, although his landing wasn't graceful and I saw him choke back some vomit before he stood on unsteady legs. "Want me to fix that for you?" He shook his head very slowly. "A cost of doing business," he said with a burp. Barkos agreed to join the crew on one condition. "Oh, and what's that?" I asked, curious as to what a man like Barkos would want for his cooperation. "You need to bring in his replacement." "That's all? Why can't he just contact his government and have them send one over?" I asked in confusion. "He did. But the man refused to come to the island and is hiding out at another, more prosperous port, called Arjun. So it's a damn fetch quest," I grumbled. "Let me guess, this guy we are looking for isn't going to want to come willingly." "That is unlikely, but Barkos said the man is a coward and we should be able to subdue him with little effort and bring him aboard for the trip back." I feel like there is something Barkos isn't telling us, but fine. "Why don't you get some sleep? We can leave after you've recovered." We left late in the evening after Kickle recovered from his drunken stupor. I was pretty sure the man could have piloted the Retribution in that state without much issue, but better safe than sorry. Our destination was southeast, about 5 days away if the weather held out. Which I doubted it would, going by the already increasing amount of mist gathering under some of the smaller islands. The phenomenon was interesting to watch, and in my boredom while waiting for Kickle I had built a mana barometer of sorts. The needle on the device had been steadily climbing during the last hour. While it wasn't all that useful as you could see the mist getting thicker, it may come in handy to tell when the mists would dissipate. When I showed it to Kickle and explained what it did, he thought it was quite useful. Apparently, there could be nasty mana storms in the mist. According to him, it was the one thing that would force even pirates out into the open. I was glad I hadn't randomly stumbled into one of these storms before finding a guide. The trip to the next port city was uneventful. We had only spotted a few ships in the distance as we traveled. They were too far out to identify them, even for Kickle's sharp eyes. By the time we coasted into the large port, the mist had fully taken over again. The port was easily twice the size of Posa. Arjun was also not an Avwilian protectorate port, it was run by the guild. So I would have to step lightly here. It also happened to have a bazaar. The first I had seen in the Isles. It took some time to find a berth for Retribution. With the mist fully engulfing the area once more, most ships were docked and waiting for the mist to clear before embarking, making available docking space hard to come by. We weren't able to find an open berth in the main docks, so Kickle steered the ship below the island to a rough set of dugout caves. These used to be smuggler landings. Nobody really uses them anymore since the tunnels into the town are long and winding, but it might work in our favor. It'll be a tight fit though, as they weren't exactly built to handle a ship as large as Retribution. But I think we can back it in enough to keep the ship from sliding out and falling into the ocean below. Kickle's words didn't exactly engender confidence in this plan. "Well, how can I say no to that resounding vote of confidence?" I replied flatly, earning a chuff of amusement from the old jerboa. He was right though, it was a tight fit, width-wise. The height was more than tall enough, built for a dirigible-style ship, I was guessing. There was a grinding noise as the ship knocked loose a protruding stone. Thankfully the compressed and rune-enhanced titanium was far harder than the walls, making the damage to the ship only superficial. The ship jerked to a stop as it impacted the rear wall. I had expected it, but I still winced. But we were inside. About a third of the bow still stuck out of the shallow cave, and this had been the deepest of the 5 caves. "So," Kickle said, "how are we going to grab this person?" I shrugged. "First we have to find them. We can come up with a plan after that." "Oh, make sure the flag is still attached to the upper hull, we don't want to lose that, or we may be mistaken for pirates ourselves." The flag in question came from Barkos. It marked us as an official envoy of the Avwilian Protectorate, not that it would stop the guild from shooting us down, but at least we wouldn't be stuck with bounties after kidnapping our target. Barkos hadn't given much information on the man we needed to find, other than that he was a degenerate gambler and womanizer. Oh, and he also supplied a name, Shastis. Barkos either didn't know anything else or thought it would be funny to make us work even harder for his help. Either way was fine with me. I wasn't planning on being the man's buddy, I just wanted his skills and levels to assist in my plan. After an hour of walking through winding tunnels, Kickle and I stepped out into the lush jungle on the island. I had no clue how large this island was, but Kickle had said it was larger than the one that Pusa was situated on. We hiked out of the dense tropical jungle and onto the road. We could only tell it was a road by the dull glow of magical street lamps overhead. It was pretty late in the day, but there was still traffic along the road as people and carts pulled by draft animals made their way down the magically compressed path. I had to give the guild credit, they built a damn fine road. It was easily as smooth and flat as a pre-system highway, just not as wide. It was also a bit weird as the color of the road matched the surrounding dirt, an almost orange-brown color. I guess not needing concrete or asphalt made road building quite easy. Just compress the local soil until you get your desired result, also easy to repair. Come on, the town's this way, Kickle gestured, as he nearly disappeared into the mist. If it wasn't for the lights I would have lost him completely. As it was, I was only following his dim silhouette. I couldn't imagine having to live in this type of environment my entire life, not being able to see a third of the time would have driven me nuts. Another thing that would have driven me crazy was the eerie animal noises coming from the surrounding forest. Occasionally I would see a spark leap from one of the lamps, followed by an angry screech as whatever was hit by the discharge flew off to find easier prey. Kickle and the other vague shapes I saw in the mist seemed unconcerned about it, so I just kept moving. Eventually, the mist brightened as we neared what I assumed was the port. It was like a lighthouse in the dark, and as we passed an invisible line the mist simply vanished. The change was so sudden I almost ran into the back of Kickle. I turned around to see the wall of mist curve up and over the city, following an invisible dome of magic. Neat, I said. Yes, the guild towns like to show off with their mist shields. But it's a waste of mana hearts if you ask me. Come, I know a few of the more reputable gambling dens in the city, we can start our search there. And if we don't find him in one of those? Kickle shrugged, then we start looking in the shadier places. I'm sure a few credits will get us his location by that point. Nobody frequents those types of places unless they have no other place to go. Alright, lead on. The first location was the gaudiest building I had ever laid eyes on. It must have used every bright color known to man and some that didn't seem physically possible. It made the ostentatious buildings in Vegas look like a church town in comparison. Thankfully we didn't have to spend much time in that place as our search quickly came up empty. The next place was less garish but more opulent. Obsidian pillars, with veins of gold and ivory, towered overhead and out of sight into a ceiling obscured by an ever-moving starfield illusion. It was quite the sight, and even Kickle stopped to admire the enchantment. The rest of the building was made of cream-colored ivory with gold and black accents. It was more imposing than inviting, but I felt the urge to stay and spend money. I had to shake my head, realizing there must be some enchantment designed to make me feel this way. I growled in annoyance and popped my old mind defense ring on. I tapped Kai-Hall on the shoulder and handed him another. He didn't bother asking what it was before sliding it on his finger. The effect was immediate as his eyes cleared and he chittered quietly in annoyance while looking around. We were able to clear that place pretty quickly also. There were few people inside and none of them looked like the degenerate gambling type, although we did identify all of them just in case. The last place was more normal is the word I would use to describe the building, but that is only in the context of combination gambling/brothel establishments. Otherwise, it was pure Vegas class aesthetics. It took far longer to go through this building as it was 4 floors and it wasn't like we could barge into the private rooms to see who was enjoying a roll. Thankfully, Kickle found someone he knew. So you're looking for that shit Shasties, eh? Yeah, know where we can find him? Kickle asked his Jerboa companion. I don't know, I'm old so my memory is kind of fuzzy. I was going to roll my eyes at the blatant act, but Kickle beat me to it by chittering in amusement. If you could find it in you to recall, I imagine we could burden your pockets with some spare cred. Now that you mention it, I think I saw that sleaze down by Doniger's place. All of the amusement drained from Kickle's face at that. You're sure? Why would I lie about something like that? Thanks for the tip, for your troubles, Kickle said, handing the other Jerboa a credit voucher. Thank you, and tell your family I asked about them. But you didn't, the other Jerboa said. Yeah, but they don't know that, Kickle added, tipping his hat before he walked away, leaving the other old Jerboa to grumble under his breath. What was that all about? Posturing mostly. If I gave face to the man by asking about his family, I would be admitting he was superior to me, because I have no family for him to ask about in return. This way, he is still inferior to me but can look superior in the eyes of his clan. They would have found out eventually that he spoke to a black ring and that would make him look weak if not for my gesture. I just shook my head at the absurdity of it all. Fine, what about this Doniger? It isn't a person, that's the name of the establishment. A whorehouse, filled with only slaves. He paused to see my reaction but I just took a deep breath. I'm not here to save people, I will control myself. I could see that he didn't quite believe me but he nodded and we kept walking. Chapter 192, Shastis. Doniger's place looked like nothing more than a rundown warehouse from the outside. If it wasn't for the animated illusion of a woman spreading her legs above the door, we may have walked right past it. I would probably still walk past it if we weren't here to find someone. There were two burly-looking guards outside, both level 17. They gave us the once-over but didn't move from their posts. Kickle walked up to one slipping a cred stick into his palm. Is Shastis here tonight? The man looked over to his buddy, who was looking put out for not getting the bribe and Kickle tossed a stick his way as well. Yeah, he's here, been with Manisa most of the night. If you got beef with him, don't start it inside. No beef, just wish to talk. The other guard snorted, sure. As we entered, the noise and smells of the place assaulted my nose. There was some rubber-armed creature with four limbs banging away what would generously be considered a song at one end of the bottom floor. I coughed as the haze of narcotic smoke drifted past my nose. It was so thick I even got a status effect from it. I cleansed away the mind-altering effect as we weaved through the haphazard tables, filled with people gambling and playing whatever games of luck they played. The gambling parlor was a mix of eclectic species which wasn't a surprise given the bazaar located in town. After asking the bartender when Manisa would be available we sat down and waited. I should have realized something was off based on the bartender's reaction but at the time I was tired of searching for this man. About 10 minutes after we sat down, Kickle alerted me to a change. We have company, 5 fighters just came down from upstairs and they are all looking directly our way. I turned towards the stairs as the 5 men reached the bottom. Identify told me 4 of them were level 19 and the 5th, situated in the back was Shastis and he was a bit higher level. Shastis Runecaster/Conjurer Adept 22/15. Well, at least we know what Barkos didn't tell us, I grunted in annoyance. Shastis was a gangly-looking human with sunken eyes the color of dirty ice. His greasy black hair was slicked back making the widow's peak even more prominent and as he approached our table he sneered down at us over a hooked nose. It made him look like a bird of prey, not that I found the short man's appearance all that intimidating. He couldn't have been more than 5'6" with shoes on. Can we help you? I asked, looking at the assembled ruffians. I hear you've been looking for me. Perhaps if you tell me why I may even let you walk out of here. I simply reached into my pocket and held out the signed orders Barkos had given us. I felt no need to lie to this man, he might be a pain to subdue but his so-called allies wouldn't be much of a problem. One of his minions snatched it out of my hand and looked it over before snorting, then he handed it to Shastis. So, that drunken oaf finally found someone to take on this suicide mission. Well, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I won't be going to that wretched island, not that you could make me. But, yes, you must have come in a ship. I will make you a deal, I will let the 2 of you live in exchange for your ship. Kickle didn't like this threat and tried to stand but I put my arm on his shoulder and shook my head. I don't see as we have an option here, do I? No, Shastis said smugly. Well, I will have to take you to the ship and deactivate the defenses. What assurances do I have that you will let me live after? You have my word that no harm will come to you or your companion, but your companion will need to remain here, you can rejoin him when I have control of your airship. Fine, I said through gritted teeth, really laying on the theatrics. I stood slowly and Shastis and 2 of his goons followed along behind me. Honestly, I would have figured getting him to the ship would have been the hard part. I didn't expect the man to practically throw himself into being captured but hey it worked out for me. At first, when he said he was taking my ship I was confused but then I realized he had probably overstayed his welcome in this town. Kickle had said nobody frequented places like Doniger's if they had somewhere else to go. He probably needed to get out of town before his debts caught up with him. I wasn't sure if the man thought he was going to strong-arm my crew or what his plan was once he got aboard my ship, assuming he had one. As for his goons, they were probably expendable, otherwise, why leave 2 behind? It wasn't like he could hold a ship with 3 people. Leaving Kickle behind with the other two wasn't an issue. I had no doubts that Kickle could take down those two idiots without much problem. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if he beat us to the cave where we docked the ship. The four of us walked in silence. It was only broken when Goon number 1 poked me in the back with the tip of his sword and told me to move faster. I suppressed my desire to rip that sword out of his hand and shove it down his throat. Only because I didn't feel like dragging an unconscious Shastis all the way to the ship. So for now I put up with it and tried to move faster through the thick mist outside of the town. With my high intelligence, I was able to easily recall the path we had taken through the jungle. "Where are you going?" Shastis demanded after we left the trail. "To the ship." "What, you didn't think we were docked in the normal area, did ye?" "Of course not," the man hissed in outrage, pretending he had divined my motives. I barely managed to not laugh, just wondering what sort of idiotic plan you had to capture me. "Let me guess, knock me unconscious and drag me out to these old smuggler trails." I shrugged. I like to keep things simple. "Yes, simple plans for a simpleton. What of your other crew, they going to be a problem?" "Just me and the jerboa, ship's small, needed to be to fit in the cave, might as well put him at ease, it would help lower his guard." The man grunted in acceptance as he glanced at something strapped to his arm. Something to see if I was telling the truth maybe? It would make sense given the man's cautious nature. We entered the tunnel shortly after and made our way through the winding passages. I was prepared to be attacked but it never came. Either he really needed my compliance or his men were idiots. Probably a bit of both, I thought. "What the hell's is this?" Shastis screeched as we entered the cave with retribution. "My ship, Day. You lied to me, how? How did you get past my falsehood detector? There is no way that only you and that jerboa can man this ship. I don't know what sort of shitty enchantment the guild sold you but I never lied. Not that it matters, because you're coming with me. I want to thank you for making this easy." The man hissed like a snake, "As if the likes of you could best me," he said, starting a chant as his minions drew their swords. I cast silence and my armor appeared a moment later. I didn't call out my staff, the area was too tight to use it, so I just summoned my mace that had the same enchantment consuming void did. I found that most people were so surprised by the gut-wrenching pain caused by the soul siphon ability that they would be stunned into a stupor for a bit. It worked better on people with a low constitution, but I suspected our friend here didn't have much to work with. After disrupting Shastis' spell, the man looked a bit frazzled and tried to back out of the cave, but his other minion was blocking the path. Probably because he had two glowing daggers sticking through his back from Kickle. I slapped away the short sword of my attacker and smashed my metal fist into his face with a satisfying crunch. There was a spurt of blood as the man staggered backward. But he quickly recovered, stabbing his sword toward my torso. I twisted slightly, letting the blade slide across my armor as I brought my mace around and smashed his elbow in. Then I followed it up with an arcane bolt to his face. The distance was so short that it looked like arc lightning leaped from my palm and into his eye. I assumed he screamed as he clutched at his ruined face, but my silence spell was still active so I could hear nothing. One more blow with my mace caved in his head and I pushed the corpse out of my way as I stalked toward Shastis. The man had seemed to recover from his initial shock and a rope of red energy was spiraling around his body. I kind of wanted to try and steal it from him, but we needed this guy alive, so I held off, not wanting it to be known I could steal skills. At least I got something from the thug I dismantled. I would have to see what that was later. The red energy pulsed and froze into rings that expanded from the man's body, carving through the rock like butter. I jumped back and avoided most of the attack, but I lost a few fingers on my hand. I growled in annoyance as those would take time to heal. The man was already trying to cast another spell, but I had had enough. I activated Unstoppable Force and slammed into him. The man smashed into the wall and bounced off, screaming in pain as my silence spell finally ended. I may have overdone it as the man's arms and legs were a mangled wreck. I pulled out a pair of magic suppression cuffs and slapped them on the dude. Then I healed him only enough to stop the bleeding. "You won't get away with this," he said through pained breaths. "Get away with what? We're just doing a job and returning you to yours. Just be glad we needed you alive." I lifted the man like a sack of fruit and tossed him over my shoulder before I jumped aboard the ship. I was actually surprised. I figured this stupid mission would have taken weeks to track down this idiot, but here he goes practically handing himself to us on a silver platter. Once on board, I strapped the crying man into a seat and shoved a gag in his mouth. He kept blabbering on about not wanting to go to that desolate island and he would rather die, blah blah blah, cry me a river, God. Other than listening to the man moan through his pain and try to get the gag out of his mouth, the trip back to Hylity was uneventful. I don't know who was more surprised, me or Barkos, as we tossed his replacement down at his feet. Then again, Barkos's surprise may have just been due to his inebriation. I had to ask myself why we went through all this trouble for a drunk. Then I remembered how easily he moved with a blade even in that state. Old buddy, so good of you to finally come to take over for me. You know I was getting worried when you never responded to my letters. But it seems you are alive and well. Forgive me, I'm being rude and should hand over my duties to you. Now, as a vested member of the Avwilian Protectorate Port Authority, I duly turn over this position to you and tender my resignation. Chin up, old buddy, Barkos added, slapping the man on the shoulder and eliciting a wince. I'm sure someone will be along shortly to relieve you as well. Oh, Captain, you can remove the cuffs. You sure? Barkos nodded. Yet, he is oath-bound not to harm anyone unless they attack him on Protectorate grounds, he added with a lopsided smile. All right, I said, removing the suppression cuffs. Shastes looked like all the life drained out of him as he collapsed to the floor and started bawling. Well, Barkos sniffed, the atmosphere here has turned rather depressing, perhaps we should be off. I agreed, the less time spent at this port the better. Barkos started whistling a jaunty tune as he practically skipped out of the rundown dive bar and headed for the ship. I gave one last look at the sad sack of a man bawling on the floor before I left as well. Chapter 193, New Crew. Despite Barkos's desire to leave the island, we didn't leave right away. Well, we left the island but stayed near the port. I wanted to get a measure of the man's abilities before I accepted him as crew. If I didn't like what he offered, we would just drop him at the next nearest port and go our separate ways. When I told Barkos this, he laughed. Any port beats this dump. You will have to forgive me if my skills are a bit rusty, I haven't had to use them in almost a decade, he said as he stretched. Despite his words, I knew he couldn't be that rusty, going by what I had seen of his knife work. Also, just how old was he? The man didn't look to be older than his mid-30s. That would mean he did all this leveling in his 20s. From what I knew of other worlds, they were much tamer and leveling was far harder than it was on Earth. It's one of the reasons so many factions were trying to gain a foothold on our planet. It didn't help that huge swaths of land and entire kingdoms had been transported to Earth either. The Isles were a prime example. Not only was it a kingdom, but it was multiple kingdoms and a damn guild haven. Barkos finally finished stretching and a dagger flashed into his hand from the sheath on his belt. Okay, I'm ready. I nodded and accepted the duel request. I was already wearing my full armor and had my staff in my hand. Oh, a staff fighter, don't see many of those. Let's see what you're capable of, Captain, the man said with a cheeky smile. Since we were on the deck of Retribution, floating only a few feet off the ocean, a lot of my spells wouldn't be useful for this fight. Some I didn't want to use for fear of damaging the ship, and others I wouldn't be able to use as there was no Earth around for me to manipulate unless I managed to get off calcifying strike. But I wouldn't let that stop me from trying. I started off by rushing the man and casting Pearlescent Vortex. I hadn't had much opportunity to play with the spell. At least it turned out more useful than the spell I got from Shastes's goon. The spell looked like a tornado of glittering light refracting dust as it swirled about Barkos. The man stumbled back and swiped at some figment with his offhand as I rushed in. That turned out to be a mistake. The smirk I saw at the last moment told me he had been bluffing and my spell failed to take hold. At least that told me his perception was above 25 or he wouldn't have been able to resist the magic's effect. I wrenched my body sideways trying to avoid his dagger to no avail. I grunted in pain as 3 quick jabs perforated my armor. By the time I recovered my footing, the man had moved to the opposite end of the deck. Not bad, not good though either. You shouldn't assume your magic is effective on a target and while you are fast, that will only get you so far, he lectured. I grunted as I cast Rejuvenate on myself, getting a quirked eyebrow from him in reply. Well, that just means I'll get to dust off some more skills. The humor in his voice irked me. Maybe it was because he was still drunk and yet still managed to wound me. We circled each other and the man seemed fine with letting me make the first move. I saw an opening but didn't take it. Tisk, tisk, Captain. Don't second guess, sure it was a feint but if you are quick enough you can still take advantage, like this. Before he even stopped speaking, a dagger slammed into my shoulder with so much force it spun me sideways. I choked off a scream of surprise as I hadn't even seen him draw a second dagger, let alone throw it. I spun to face him again, pulling the dagger out and throwing it back. The man laughed and easily caught the weapon, palming it. I didn't understand where he was hiding the weapon. He didn't have any storage ring or device that I could see. The one he had as the dock master had to be turned over to the new dock master. Watch the hands, watch the feet, but most importantly, watch the eyes. The eyes will tell you what's happening before it happens. That's some sort of ability, I grunted, adjusting my shoulder to let the healing magic work. He shook his head, no, just years of observation. The duel went on for another half hour and I failed to land so much as a blow or magical strike on the man. It was a bit pathetic if I'm honest. He was only marginally faster than me but not as agile as Ska. He also couldn't have more than 5 base stat points over me, unless he had gotten as lucky as I had and raided multiple horde dungeons. No, this wasn't all stats, the man was just way more skilled than anyone I had ever fought before. He never even used any abilities as far as I could tell. You did good, Captain. But you're probably gonna die out here, especially if you want to go up against some of the larger pirate fleets. Those people have been fighting for their lives for decades and one false step is all it'll take for them to gut you. You sound so sure of that, I said, panting after our match. It comes from experience and losing many allies along the way. I nodded, fine. Let's say you're right, how do we fix that? Barcos chuckled. I doubt fixing it is an option, but perhaps with daily training, you may improve enough not to strand Kickle and me to a watery grave right beside you. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. I'm going to take a shower. Barcos chuckled at this strange turn of fate his life took as he headed out of the galley with a bottle of something called tequila. He had expected to die an ignoble death on the barren stretch of rock that only the most desperate dared to visit, but this strange human with his strange ship came along. Barcos plopped down in the chair next to Kickle and popped the top off the alcohol, taking a long pull before letting out a satisfied burp. So, did you tell the captain why you really joined his crew? No, well, not all of it, Kickle grunted. What about you, did you tell the captain about your past and why you were stuck on Hylity? Gods, no, Barcos replied. There was a silence that stretched on for a bit before he added, at least this'll be an interesting trip. They both laughed and Barcos tossed his feet over the arm of the chair and drank while Kickle steered this strange vessel and their rookie captain showered of all things. This tub was going to make Barcos soft, he thought as he finished off the bottle and pulled another out from his invisible storage. The next few weeks went by quickly. Each day I would spar with Barcos, getting my ass handed to me over and over, and getting pointers on what I was doing wrong. I still hadn't been able to land a hit on the man, but at least I wasn't embarrassing myself as much anymore. It reminded me of my early training with Fiona. We really didn't have a destination in mind, just a goal of hunting pirates, but they had been scarce for the time being, so after 2 weeks of fruitless searching Kickle brought us into a medium-sized port city by the name of Nuza. This was a Jerboan Federation port, although the Jerboa just called it the Federation. It was one of the 3 kingdoms that controlled the Isles of Mist. The last group being the Pirate Kings. Unlike the Protectorate, the Federation was a very loose alliance of clans. But even they had a tighter alliance than the dozen or so Pirate Kings that Kickle mentioned to me. They would fight amongst themselves as much as they fought off attempts from the other 2 kingdoms to put them down. The only group that got a pass was the Guild, because nobody wanted to piss them off and lose access to their shipbuilders. And the Guild fully knew that and took advantage of the situation to sell to all sides. The port of Nuza was busy, but not to the extent of some of the others I had seen. The day was clear, so most ships were coming or going. We found a decent spot to dock and shut the boat down. Well, Kickle and I did. Barcos was passed out in his cabin. I was pretty sure the man had gone through 2/3 of my alcohol stock in 2 weeks. If it wasn't for the fact that I still couldn't touch him while he was plastered, I may have told him to lay off the alcohol. Then again, I wasn't paying either of them. I should probably talk to them about pay. Captain, I have a few contacts here, one of them should be able to point us to a pirate hideout. You and Barcos should resupply, it won't take me long. You sure? Won't the locals give you shit about the ring? I said, pointing to my ear. They won't bother, I might as well be a dead man walking in their eyes. All right, but I think I'll leave Barcos aboard. I don't feel like curing his drunken state will do me any favors. Kickle grunted, in that case, stick to the non-Jerboa merchants near the pier. It won't be the best deal, but it will keep you out of trouble. The Jerboa will see you as an outsider and at the least try to swindle you, or they may try to steal from you as they consider non-ringed people to be easy targets. I laughed. I would love to see them try. I could use a win, getting a beatdown from Barcos each day is depressing. I imagine it is. Just be aware, killing a jerboa in a fair fight is considered legal here. As is getting killed in a fair fight, but the survivor or their friends will determine if the fight was fair. If they say it wasn't, you may be heavily fined or worse. I sat up in my chair. Is that a common issue? It is if they are pirates. It's a good way to get away with murdering your rival, or so I've heard. Well shit, maybe I will wake Barcos up, just as a backup. A wonderful idea, Captain. Now I must go and find my contacts. I managed to get a grumpy Barcos out of bed without having to use cleanse on the man. He didn't appear too happy about the situation, but perked up slightly when I told him we were in a jerboa port. Apparently, he was aware of their reputation, not surprising given the fact that he knew Kickle. I secured the ship and the two of us walked down the dock toward the merchants. I was quick to notice there were two types of jerboa, at least in this port. Those that ignored you as if you didn't exist or were below them somehow, and those that actively went out of their way to make nuisances of themselves, by bumping you and trying to shove you out of their way. It was quite comical to see the larger beings stumble when they ran into us and not the other way around. Barcos was making a game of it by angling his body just right to make some stumble and outright fall. I just shook my head and kept walking. At least the pushy ones were smart enough to not start something when they realized we were stronger than we looked. The docks and market were packed. Thankfully, there were more non-jerboa about in this area. Still, the jerboa outnumbered all others by 3 to 1. I found a stall selling food stock and purchased enough to replace the stuff aboard the ship that we had already gone through. Part of Barcos's agreement to accompany me on this little field trip was the acquisition of more booze. I sighed at that and rethought my idea to pay him. Maybe he would just be happy with drinking away his coin. I had just spotted a merchant selling what we needed when a massive dark brown jerboa slammed into me, causing me to stumble. What the fuck? I yelled, annoyed and angry. Watch where you're going, unblooded, the large jerboa sneered. How about you watch yourself, you giant pile of shit? The jerboa froze and turned to me. What did you call me? He spit through clenched teeth as he drew a wicked-looking falchion. Had I known the man was so sensitive about his coloring, I may have chosen a different response. No, probably not. You heard me, shit for brains. You wanna go? Let's fucking do this. The fight did not go in the large jerboa's favor. He was big and strong but slow as fuck. I ducked under a swipe of his blade and punched him under the arm with my metal fist. There was a crack of breaking ribs and an exhale of breath as the large bastard tried to topple over on top of me. I sidestepped his girth and kneed him on the same side. The jerboa was slow to get up after my attack and retrieve his sword that had clattered a few feet away. But when he did, his face was a mask of rage as he came at me again. If I thought he was slow before, he was glacial now. The broken ribs hampered his swing, so I grabbed his arm, locked it in an arm bar, then flipped into the air and locked my legs around his neck, carrying him to the ground and dislocating his shoulder. I kicked him in the side of the head and rolled away before coming to a stand. The jerboa was on the ground groaning in pain. Nobody seemed inclined to help him. Barcos took this opportunity to whisper into my ear, "It's to the death, he won't stop until one of you is dead." I grunted in annoyance at this news as I took a breath and walked over to the fallen jerboa. I straddled his back and wrapped my arms around his neck, giving it a sharp twist. There was an audible crack as the body went limp and the crowd that had formed, dispersed, except for 3 other jerboa. One grabbed the body and stored it in a ring while the other 2 spit at the ground where the body had been. "They are showing contempt for the loser," Barcos said. "Yeah. I got that much. Come on, let's get this shopping done." The whole encounter had left me annoyed and angry. I didn't relish having to kill, but I wasn't about to stand back while someone tried to use me as a door rug. Chapter 194, The Next Target. My concern over being singled out and bullied didn't come to pass. It seemed the fight had been left at just that and nobody came to harass us after. That gave me time to restock all the food and alcohol that had been consumed during our journey so far. Food was cheap, I didn't splurge on anything fancy. I wasn't nearly a good enough cook to waste good food, not that the others seemed to care or ever complimented or complained about what was provided so far. Barcos and I arrived back aboard Retribution before Kickle. With nothing else to do, I asked the man if he wanted to spar with me again. "I would, Captain, but we have enough eyes on us as it is." "Wait, we do?" I asked in surprise. "You didn't notice the additional glares or furtive looks?" "No, I mean, other than the normal amount. Barkos chuckled, that was hardly normal. No, I suspect word has already gotten around about your ship's exploits and at least part of your crew. What? All this extra attention because I offed a few pirates and took on Kickle? Is this because of that stupid black ring of his? Barkos shrugged, but I sensed he knew more about this issue than he was letting on. I could try to force the issue and make him tell me, but I suspected he would up and leave the crew if I tried. And despite the man's faults, he was a proficient fighter and, dare I say, a decent teacher. I could tell my combat ability had grown at least a bit in our training sessions. At least I felt more confident, and that underlying disconnect from the knowledge I had been given to my actual skill was slowly growing smaller. It was just more proof that actual skill trumped the knowledge of how to do something. I was still years away from being a master though. Which was made even harder since the one trainer I had come across, Old Man Trumbo, said my style diverged too far from his own for his training to be effective. Technically, the duels Barkos and I were having weren't training either. He only helped make me aware of my deficiencies. It was up to me to figure out how to correct them. One thing he did point out was that I should be utilizing my whole body. A weapon was great, but I had hands, feet, elbows, knees, even a thick skull, as he put it. The last one might have been a joke. My problem was tunnel vision. I would attack with my magic and my staff, and that was really it for the most part. Very rarely would I need to use the rest of my body to engage an opponent. This was partly my fault, as I had outleveled most people and skill hadn't really come into play more than a handful of times since the world changed. Which brought up another question. You have skills, right? I asked Barkos. He pulled the open bottle of liquor from his mouth and nodded. Course I do, just like everyone else. Then why don't you use them in our fights? He shrugged. Other than the fact that I don't need to, relying on something that isn't yours can be a crutch. I'll use them if I have to, but I'll stick to my good old steel to get the job done, he replied, a knife appearing in his hand, balanced on the tip of his finger before he flipped it into the air and made it vanish as it landed back in his hand with a smirk. His words made sense. Take Fiona for example. Even at her lower level, she had the ability to reflect magic. Now she has a weapon that can nullify magic. I guess if something as powerful as magic had been around on Earth for as long as it had been on other worlds, we would have developed counters against it as well. Hell, I had already developed a few of my own in the form of my Scrambler and Drainer. Although, those only worked against enchantments of a certain type. Kickle eventually returned. I have good news, he said as he stepped into the galley where Barkos and I were sitting. Good, we can get out of here. I feel like the locals' eyes are boring a hole into the ship. Any idea why that might be? I imagine it's because they don't like me much, Kickle responded indifferently. I sighed, figuring that was the best answer I was gonna get for the moment, and let it go. Fine, what's this information? It may be more than the three of us can handle, but I got the location of a local pirate hideout. 3 ships max, with the possibility that only one may be moored at the moment. If we can take out their ship, we can secure any looted goods we can carry. I grunted, rubbing my chin in thought. It hadn't slipped my attention that Kickle seemed a little more enthusiastic about the loot than I thought warranted. Pieces of the puzzle that were Kickle were coming together in my mind, and the picture it was providing wasn't pretty. He hadn't done anything to harm or hinder me though, so I would hold off on my opinion until I learned the truth, or he did something to make me have to kill him. Okay, let's go and scout the location. You sure? Nobody else knows where we are going. If you're asking if I trust my contact, the answer is no, Captain. That's why we have to do this quickly. All right, get the ship running and get us on the way. You ready for a fight, Barkos? I asked, turning to the drunken man. The man huffed in indignation. Your idea of a fight and mine are entirely different, Captain. I doubt I will even get a workout out of this. I just shook my head and got up to head to the command room. At least Barkos wasn't shy about a fight. That would have been an enormous waste of time if he was. Still, with just the two of us on this pirate hideout and Kickle piloting the ship, it was going to be difficult. I had to put faith that my recent improvements would be enough to carry me through. At least it was on an island, that would make it easier on me. It took a day to locate the island in question. Unlike some of the other floating islands, this one was spewing magma from a volcano on one end. The only explanation for this phenomenon I could come up with was magic fuckery. Probably an elemental vent. Thankfully our target was on the far side of the island away from this terrain feature. Unfortunately, our luck wasn't as good there. Instead of the single ship we had been hoping for, there were 2 docked on the island. They were also pointed broadside out and all of the weapons were manned. The hidden fort rested in a rough cave on the island's side, making an attack from any other direction impossible. "I think your contact sold you out," I said to Kickle. "I think you are correct, Captain. What do you want to do?" I mulled over the problem as we circled the area like an invisible shark. "What would you do if you were these pirates?" I asked Kickle. The jerboa didn't bat an eye before he responded. "Have the third ship nearby to trap us as we attacked." "Yup, that sounds like a sensible plan. Let's go find this third ship." The missing ship was a bit harder to locate. But we did eventually find it, hiding near the island within a stealth field. Thankfully, their stealth field was not as good as ours and it left a distortion in the air. They masked this by hiding near the volcanic side of the island. A smart move, assuming they stayed far enough away that the lava elementals didn't catch them. There was one problem with attacking them though. We couldn't tell what size of vessel it was. I could assume it was similar to the 2 vessels docked at the pirate base, but that was a dangerous assumption. "Well, how should we handle this unknown ship?" I asked the other 2. Barcos was the first to respond. "It's likely their flagship, as it would be too risky to leave it in the dock while we attacked. Probably a triple-deck dirigible." "Barcos is probably correct," Kickle added, "but it may also be longship." "Longship?" I asked. "Similar to the triple-deck but about half again as long, giving it an additional 9 cannons per side." "So, you think we can take it?" "Maybe," was the only response I got from Kickle, and a shrug was all I got from Barcos. I sighed. Well, no reason to back down now. Let's use our speed to our advantage and streak past them as I fire. "Well, I'm gonna go strap myself in near the hatch. I suspect we will have some boarders to deal with," Barcos replied, strutting out of the room while he hummed an unknown tune. Kickle circled away from the ship's hiding spot as I prepped the weapons. It was going to be a fast flyby from stealth, then I would have to switch to the shield. Without a visual reference, I decided to spread the weapon's fire across the blurred area, at least this way I would land at least a few hits. I also engaged the continuous fire option for my monolasers. We reached our destination and Kickle arced the ship in a tight turn before maxing out the throttle. 80 miles an hour wasn't fast when compared to planes or jets, but when you were in a solid chunk of metal it seemed pretty fast. We quickly covered the distance to our target and I fired off all the weapons that could target the ship. The screen didn't white out this time as there was no mist to scatter the intense light of the energy discharge. I quickly turned off the cloak and engaged the shield. The retribution rocked as enemy fire struck only a moment later. But my attack had been a success. Sections of the now visible enemy ship were no more than splinters and large scars ran down the length of their ship from my monolasers. Despite the success, the enemy ship was not out of the action and I could see the damage I had caused them starting to heal. "They have wood mages," Kickle grunted. The ship rocked again as another cannonball found us. "Get us back in range so I can remove their cannons." Kickle jerked up on the control stick and the retribution did something it wasn't designed to do, and that was flip over. I gripped the arms of my chair hard as the ship rolled and then fell from the air as there weren't any runes on the top deck to keep it flying. With a jerk of the stick to the side, the ship righted itself again and I nearly lost my lunch. "Damn it! Warn me before you are going to pull a stunt like that," I swore, quickly realigning the weapons as we raced back toward the enemy vessel. The enemy ship was a triple-deck dirigible but thankfully, not a longship. We took hits but the shield was holding at 40% after 3 strafing runs and recharging as we got out of their arc of fire. The enemy ship was trying to maneuver their undamaged side toward us as I saw the first boarders flash off the enemy deck. Who needed ropes when you had magic? I keyed the intercom. "Barcos, you have company." I didn't need to worry about the boarders getting inside the ship, the teleportation scrambler prevented that. The sounds of shouting and the screams of wounded penetrated the deck as we fired once again at the beleaguered vessel. We kept firing on their damaged side as we were too fast for them to get their other side turned toward us. The ship rocked upward violently. "What the hell was that?" I shouted, looking around until I spotted the culprit. We had been forced over the island in order to keep the enemy's damaged side facing us but had earned the ire of the locals. 3 lava elementals were below and charging a massive glowing ball of magma which shot our way a moment later. Kickle jerked the ship sideways, avoiding the projectile while I fired one of the monocannons at the 3 monsters. Unfortunately, that only seemed to make them mad. And a pillar of lava struck the underside of the retribution, lifting the ship and tossing it around. The shield was nearly depleted by the attack before Kickle managed to get us away from the island. Thankfully, the elementals were equal opportunity assholes and had also attacked the enemy ship, which was now burning as lava pooled across their deck. Chapter 195, Polishing off the rust. Barkos sighed and stored the bottle of alcohol away as he heard the captain announce there were boarders on the deck. He unstrapped himself and loosened his shoulders as he opened the hatch and stepped out. He avoided the blade aimed for his throat and left a dagger in the man's throat in return. He wasn't surprised someone had been waiting to attack the only entrance to the top deck. He heard one of the boarders hiss, "Who let you out of your hole, Blade Master?" "Does it matter?" Barkos replied. "No, you're as good as dead anyway." All 10 men rushed Barkos as he danced between them, whistling softly as his blades carved through his opponents with ease. The Dirge of Defiance was one of his favorite songs from his Bladesinger class and he hadn't had a reason to use it in far too long. He cut through the riffraff sent against him. They weren't true opponents, only meant to weaken him for the rest. The pirates had sent 40 people aboard the Retribution. Some were trying to damage the guns but were finding it extremely difficult. A few others were setting charges on the deck. Not ideal, but he would deal with it. He flicked out 5 daggers faster than the eye could see and the men placing the charges all fell to the ground, dead. 3 men rushed him and Barkos could tell, these 3 were skilled, not as skilled as him but few could match his talent with a blade. The 4 of them clashed as other men rushed to continue setting the charges and a few tried to pry the hatch open and get inside. That was when the ship violently lurched into the air. Air that had grown quite a bit hotter, he noted. Barkos had seen the approaching elementals out of the corner of his eye but hadn't thought the captain would antagonize them. The man was nothing if not entertaining. Barkos laughed as half the pirates were thrown to the ground. A few even fell overboard into the superheated column of rock. Only 4 people didn't falter, Barkos and his 3 opponents. Using a tiny opening, Barkos threw out 3 more daggers, killing 3 more pirates before they could get up. They weren't the 3 he was currently engaged with, he wanted to savor this fight. His random killing did anger one of the 3, forcing him to push even harder. Barkos just sighed and slipped a dagger into the man's heart as he was leaving all kinds of openings in his zeal to end the fight faster. The other 2 fought on but without the 3rd, they couldn't keep Barkos from occasionally throwing out daggers and killing more of the pirates aboard. The count was now down to about 15. Barkos heard a scream behind him as the hatch opened and his captain stepped out onto the deck. The noise didn't distract Barkos or his 2 opponents though. I quickly surveyed the scene on deck. It was one thing to watch it from the command room. The 3 men that had been trying to wrench the hatch open were thrown away when I unlocked it. 2 people were fighting tooth and nail with Barkos and another 10 pirates were trying to attach something to the deck in a few spots. I shot an overcharged frost wave at the 3 near the door, freezing them solid as I rushed past Barkos and toward the closest group of pirates. I couldn't risk setting off whatever device they were using, so ranged magic was not an option. All but one of the men stopped what they were doing and drew weapons to attack. I smashed into the group, utilizing unstoppable force to absorb the initial damage. This was enough surprise for me to crack one man across the skull with my staff as I ducked under a spear thrust. I felt a sword skitter across my shoulder, barely missing my neck. The slash wasn't deep, thanks to my armor, but blood still flowed from my wound. I snapped my staff back, catching the swordsman in the chest with the lion head. The force blasted him across the deck and into another group, sending all of them crashing to the ground. I twisted to avoid another stab of the spearman, as I kicked out, knocking his spear to the side and unbalancing him. Barkos had been fond of using that attack against me in our fights. It was highly effective against long-handled weapon users. As the man was unbalanced, I continued my spin and ducked inside his reach, shoulder-checking him. The man crashed to the ground, knocking the man that remained at the device over as well. I didn't give either a chance to scrabble to their feet as I lunged in, smashing their skulls with my staff. When I looked up again, Barkos already had a bottle in hand and the remaining men were dead. "Well, you didn't die, I guess that's something," Barkos snorted, as he headed back below deck. The cleanup took longer than the fighting. And the skills I managed to steal were as useless as the ones I got in the market fight or the previous pirate encounter. I sighed and cast them to the void to see if I got anything worthwhile in exchange. Tempest Ball creates a ball of chaotic swirling water that is 0.5 meters wide and an additional 0.5 meters is added for every 5 points of intelligence above 10. Once targeted, the ball will fly toward its target, lashing them with violent eddies of water, causing minor damage, and limiting motion. Lasts for 30 SEC, cost 100 mana, Cooldown 5 minutes. The spell sounded interesting, but I had no clue what minor damage meant. All of my other spells gave stat-based damage. I would have to play with it and find out. The other spell I got was just called Glob. There was no description, no cost, and no way to actually activate the ability, as the relevant knowledge was not added to my mind when I received it. It was a bit frustrating, but nothing I could do about it at the moment. I decided to hold on to it simply to cast it into Void Lottery again when I got another skill I didn't want. After I finished looting the pirate bodies, I pushed them overboard. The remains of the enemy ship had landed on the island and the surviving pirates had been beset by the lava elementals. It was safe to say that I wasn't going down there to pick through any remains. We waited for the shield to recharge and made our way back toward the hideout. I was now more confident in our chances at taking out the 2 ships. And I had an idea that may keep us from having to do much fighting at all. You sure about this, Captain? Kickle asked for the second time. Yup, we're here to kill pirates, loot is only a secondary concern. The jerboa grumbled quietly but maneuvered the ship above the hidden crevice the pirates were using. I started firing the monolasers to create a fracture point for the ceiling of the cavern. I had to keep switching between the weapon batteries to not overload them. It took an hour, but we now had a line carved about a foot deep across the entire surface above the cave, forming a crescent. I was glad the weapons were silent, otherwise someone may have come looking to see what the racket was about. All other noises and shaking were covered by the continuously erupting volcano in the distance. All right, set the ship down as we discussed, I said to Kickle. He did as was ordered and the Retribution touched down near the edge of the overhang. On 3, give the ship full power, I said, utilizing Newton's third law to our advantage. The ship rocketed into the air, but to do that it had to push against something. Most of the time, this force was spread out over a wide area, making it imperceptible. But I had the ability to adjust this zone, and that's just what I did. It was like a 100-ton hammer had slammed into the rock shelf. Normally it would just have shaken, but with my weakening of the structure, a massive crack sped along the groove. With an earth-shattering crack, the entire shelf collapsed at an angle, slamming into the cave floor below and sliding off into the ocean. The only thing left behind were a few mangled buildings and some very confused pirates. Both enemy ships had been crushed and dragged away as the slab of rock fell. I used the weapons on the ship to take care of any remaining pirates, not seeing any point going down there to fight them. My method did pose one issue: how to prove we killed these pirates. It wasn't like you could share kill messages. Eventually, I let Kickle set the ship down amongst the rubble to see if we could recover anything of value. Kickle looked glumly at the destruction. You think a man who had just hit level 20 would be happier? But I was starting to think my suspicions about the jerboa were accurate. Only a former pirate would lament lost loot. I decided it was time to find out. Kickle, are you a pirate? No, the old jerboa answered. I sighed and rephrased the question. Were you a pirate? This time Kickle paused before answering, yes. A well-known pirate by my guess. The man sighed and cleared off the remains of a seat before plopping down in it. You might as well sit, this is a long story. I found a crate and dragged it over. I didn't start out as a pirate. Before adolescence, I worked aboard a number of merchant ships. This is typical for my race. On one voyage, a pirate steamer surprised us and the crew failed to fight off the pirates. These were a mixed-race group of pirates, and none too kind. They killed the civilians and gave the surviving crew an option: join them or be tossed overboard. This was before the guild arrived at our shores and brought their slave devices with them. Wait, why didn't the pirates just purchase them through the bazaars? I will get to that. The pirates mistreated most of the crew that joined up. Only those that showed promise weren't beaten as severely. After a year aboard, the captain was betrayed by his first mate. A bloodbath ensued and only 5 people survived. The first mate and 4 jerboa. The ship was destroyed during the chaos, but we were within one of the pirate sanctuaries, hidden among the isles. We joined another crew, but they soon found out about the former first mate's betrayal and he was tossed overboard. Sounds like he got what he deserved, I muttered. Indeed. We got passed around from ship to ship for some time, seeing as we were slaves in all but name. Eventually, I grew skilled enough to challenge the captain of a ship called the Forsooth. The man scoffed at my audacity and accepted my challenge. I'm guessing it didn't go well for him. No, the man was a coward and trickster, but I had watched him fight for years. The fight was bloody, but it was over in less than a minute and I stood as the victor and new captain. By this time the crew was a third jerboa, and with a nod of my head, we excised the non-Jerboa from the roster. From there, I recruited a new crew and we only raided protectorate ships. We only killed when we had to, and for 2 decades, life was good. Let me guess, you were betrayed. No, I found a wife and started a family. I stopped pirating and switched to hauling cargo. The change was quite easy and only a few of the crew left for more lucrative ventures. Being all Jerboa, they understood the importance of family. Then the guild came. By this time my son was 10 or 11. We tried to compete with them, but their prices on shipping were simply too low and I was once again forced to take up piracy to make a living. It wasn't until years later that I was betrayed. I managed to escape, but not before losing my son and wife. Sorry, I didn't know, I replied. Kickle shrugged. How could you? That betrayal was 6 years ago, and I ended up stuck in Posa after being rescued. Nobody knew my name and I stayed anonymous for years until more Jerboa showed up. By then my bounty had expired as I was declared dead since a new captain was in charge of my old ship and I hadn't been seen for some time. But Jerboas never forget a grudge, and soon it was known where I was hiding. To rub it in my face, the new captain of the Forsooth started prowling around near Posa, and butchering the people aboard ships they captured. Well, that's fucked up. I can see why you want revenge now. But you said something about the bazaars. Right, before the guild, the bazaars weren't in the Isles. They can pop up and disappear on occasion. From what I understand, it has to do with trade and the volume of people in a given area. If the town is stagnant for too long, the building simply vanishes. When the guild arrived, they came in droves. Tens of millions of new residents and at least 5 new cities within the Isles. More people arrived to take advantage of the trade, and ever since, the pirate threat has exploded, with outside forces coming in to try and dominate the new resources. These would be the pirate kings. And with this influx, the 3 bazaars appeared. Why didn't you tell me all this before? Not the thing about the bazaars, but about being a pirate. Would you have taken me on board if I had? He asked in return. Fair point. No, probably not. But so far you are a good crew member. Yes, but now you will always wonder if I am going to betray you. I laughed. I assumed you would betray me at some point even before I knew you were a pirate. That got a chuckle out of the old Jerboa. A wise decision. We should probably finish looting and get out of here before someone comes snooping around. Fair enough. By the way, what's Barcosa's story? You will have to ask him, it's not for me to tell. I nodded as we moved apart to loot faster. One good thing did come from our search. One of the ship's flags lay amongst the rubble, still attached to its mast. So at least we could prove we took down one of the pirates. Now if only the pirate captain of the larger vessel come aboard during the fighting, we could have had 2. But alas, that pirate had gone down with his ship. We also looted the bodies as there were a lot of them. I split the loot 3 ways, giving the others first pick since I didn't particularly care, as it would all be sold to finance this private little war. After the spoils were divvied up, we left the remains of the pirate compound behind. I didn't bother hiding our traces as too many people already knew we were headed here anyway. Let this be a lesson to other pirates on what I would do. Chapter 196, Chumming the Water. Director Tolish, here are the weekly reports, his assistant said, handing him a stack of papers. Thank you, Vetter. Anything of note I should look into first? I have arranged them by significance, Director, the man preened. Tolish smiled, happy to have such a competent assistant as Vetter in this strange new world. He did frown slightly when he read the first page. It was a bolo for a native enchanter. The request came from another guild representative that Tolish was unfamiliar with. Tell me about this Lord Victi. Tolish asked. He is from a small house of no real repute. Their family expended all of their capital and secured a guild loan to come to this world and claim one city. Their family's only claim to fame is enchantments that mimic mind reading. It was debunked by the guild as a parlor trick and they were censured for misleading classification. The items only let the users see possibilities a few seconds into the future, and it is easily countered with a mental block artifact. Thank you for that, Vetter. What about this man they are searching for? That is actually more interesting, Director. Please look at page 2. The Director grabbed the second page and glanced over the information provided. A natural enchanter? That was rather rare. Most enchanters needed a class to be able to make the most of the skill. Unique inventions, clone tech, and an airship of some sort. Tolish could understand why this Lord Victi wanted to get control of this man, not that he particularly cared what this lord wanted. Most people outside the guild saw it as one monolithic organization, but that was far from true. It was more a cluster of warring factions that all agreed to limit the outside influence of magical technology. Tolish's group was mainly focused on trade and didn't have any specific technological achievement to their name. This worked well to allow them to become the default trading organization within the guild. Unlike some of the major houses, like the Dwarven oligarchs and their monocannons or the Silian and their slave empire built on control collars. Then there were the shipbuilders who controlled the most popular airship technologies. Tolish wouldn't be surprised if the shipbuilders got involved with this search just to keep this unknown airship technology for themselves or squash it completely. It's just what most houses did to maintain their monopolies. Tolish on the other hand would have liked to come to an arrangement with this man. At least as a subsidiary he would be covered from most of the guild's predations. But going by the information provided in the report, the man already disliked the guild and was an escaped slave. Tolish chuckled when he read that. The Silian would be incensed knowing that someone had broken their supposedly unbreakable enchantment, not that it was or ever had been very unbreakable. Tolish didn't like relying on slaves, even former criminals turned to slaves, but it was the price of doing business. To keep his costs competitive, he had to use slaves as all of the other guild traders used them as well. Tolish quirked an eyebrow as he read the rest of the report. "This is accurate?" he asked his assistant. "It was triple-checked, Director." "Well, that is interesting. Apparently, this man was flying around the Isles of Mist in his airship and hunting pirates. Perhaps a meeting wasn't out of the question. Alert our agents and ask them to invite this man and his crew to Mohissa for a meeting. Also, tell them to eliminate any guild agents that come snooping around, or redirect them if possible. I don't need a bunch of houses muddying up my trade with their infighting." "Yes, Director," the man bowed slightly before leaving the room. Tolish leaned back in his chair. This was a dangerous game to play when other houses were involved, but if he rolled over and let their agents traipse about, they would try and take control. He couldn't have that. As for this trumped-up lord, he would have no problem squashing him and his desire to build a kingdom. It was bad enough the Silian were already establishing an empire on this planet, along with a dozen other random guild houses. Tolish smiled as he had an idea how to get this Paul Fuller on his side, and it wouldn't cost him much at all. Tukath stared at the utter destruction of his base. He had been out raiding a Dormian convoy as they were always easy targets, and when he returned, the entire cave was destroyed, the ceiling simply missing. It was easy to guess what had happened, as the scrape marks were clearly evident on the stone floor. What he didn't know was how it happened. "Reach out to our nearby contacts, I want to know what transpired here, and I want to know now," he yelled, making his crew fly into action. "Sir," one of his communication people shouted, "one of our scouts located the remains of the Gurlaw." Tukath ground his teeth. "Where?" "The far side of the island. The unburnt sections of the ship show massive damage, so it appears they were in a battle. There are agitated elementals near the site and our scout had to flee before getting a closer look." Someone had done this, that much had been clear to Tukath, but who would be so brazen as to attack his holding? Another pirate fleet? No, there was no sign of the normal flotsam associated with that type of battle. Just a few bits of crushed hull floating in the ocean below the island. The massive slab of stone falling into the ocean probably pushed any other debris away, but he didn't think so. His instincts told him that whoever had attacked was still out there. "Gather the scouts, it's time to hunt," he hissed, his forked tongue flicking between his fangs. "Prince Lamine, a moment," a man asked, running up to him. Lamine's guards tensed, but relaxed when they saw who it was. "Jard, I'm kind of busy, can this not wait?" The man shook his head imperceptibly. "I wouldn't wish to keep you from something important, my prince." "My apologies, counselor, it seems work calls. I will return momentarily after I deal with this issue." "No apologies needed, Prince Lamine, take your time," the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You old snake," Lamine thought as he went to a secure room a few hallways over. As soon as the door shut, he slapped the man. "You fool, why would you rush into a private meeting like that? Unless the world is coming to an end, you maintain your composure, am I clear?" The man nodded as he rubbed his face. "Good, now what is so important that you had to pull me away?" "Your brother has escaped the island." Lamine sucked in a breath. "How? Who would dare? Free him." "It seems some outsider stumbled upon the island and your brother Barkos managed to convince him to bring his replacement to the island. Then your brother transferred over duty to the new man and relinquished his." Lamine cursed, causing the other man to flinch back in surprise. He ignored the servant and started pacing about the room. Barkos had been a thorn in his side since they were younger. Always more talented, always more handsome, always more liked by the people, despite the fact that his brother wasn't even in line for succession. It was always meant to go to him or his two younger brothers, not his fourth brother, the son of some concubine whore. Not that succession meant much outside of the house. Unlike a traditional kingdom, the protectorate was run by a committee of the 5 great houses, with a majority vote by the members being the way matters were settled throughout the kingdom. It had taken time, but Laymin had figured out a way to be rid of his brother's influence once and for all without killing him. That would have been a recklessly stupid idea. If his brother was one thing, it was a fighter. Not that Laymin lacked the ability to fight, it was required by all male heirs to at least put in a token effort by joining the Legion for a year. Laymin had done that, as did their late father, but Barkos had remained in the Legion, despite their father's protests. But knowing how to fight and living in an environment where your daily survival was uncertain was another. When the man finally returned, he came back a monster in human skin, which only solidified Laymin's resolve to be rid of him. After their father passed, Laymin made his move. He had gotten the man assigned to Hylity using the excuse that his brother needed time to convalesce after his hardship in the Legion. His reasoning was accepted by the military leadership and Barkos was moved to a dockmaster position. One he was none too happy about, but accepted it as a good soldier should. After his brother arrived at Hylity, Laymin blocked any attempt for a replacement to take over for him. This turned out to be rather easy, since dockmasters needed to submit a form to the Legion headquarters, then wait for a replacement. Intercepting the mail from the remote island wasn't too difficult. Laymin simply paid the only captain that went to that rock to toss the correspondence overboard. Barkos must have eventually realized his mail wasn't arriving. The crafty bastard managed to sneak a formal request through an underworld contact that occasionally visited the island. How this pirate managed to deliver this message was something Laymin never figured out. Laymin did learn of the letter's arrival though, and cut this attempt to get off the island at the knees by paying the replacement to make himself scarce. And for 10 years, that had worked. There was no doubt that Barkos had figured out what had transpired during his forced exile. Even cut off, his brother's underworld contacts had sold him information. Laymin had dealt with that as well, convincing the Jerboan pirates' first mate to turn on their captain. That hadn't gone as well as Laymin would have liked, producing a much more violent pirate to that area of the protectorate. But that issue could be solved with judicial force, which was easy. The hard part was dealing with his monster of a brother. Now the pissed-off monster was out of his cage and Laymin was lacking critical information on where he was or what he was planning in order to resolve the issue. "Tell me everything you know," Laymin ordered. Chapter 197, The Wayward Prince. "Damn it, Barkos, would it have killed you to tell me Kickle was a former pirate?" I complained as I sat down in the command room. Kickle grunted, but Barkos just shrugged. "Wasn't my place to say, besides, I don't see how it changes anything." I rubbed my temples. "Of course it changes things. Maybe not with the crew, but it changes how I need to go about our efforts in this region." "And what's your story anyway?" "No, wait, let me guess. You're some wayward lord, found adrift or sent into exile." I had meant it as a joke, but I caught the quick gaze from Barkos to Kickle and the subtle shake of his head in return. "Oh, for fuck's sake, you're kidding me, right?" "Well, not a lord, but I guess there's no point keeping it under wraps any longer." I sank into my chair and groaned as Barkos told his story. "So, I'm the 4th son of a house. They tend to call the oldest son of the house a prince, but I never much liked the title. My father was referred to as a sovereign and along with 4 other sovereigns, ruled over the protectorate. With every word, it felt like a lance was being driven into my skull and my mind went back to those damning words that Stygian Order man had said to me. Here was another example of events of significant importance swirling about me. I mentally sighed as I tuned back into what Barkos was saying. After my years with the Legion, I was sent to Hylity for rest and recuperation. They were probably right to do that. I was bitter and angry at the time. But after a year, I needed off the island. I gave the outgoing Legion captain my formal request to return and to be relieved of my post. When months went by and I received no response, I tried again. "Let me guess, no response again?" I interrupted. "None. Not even a you will have to wait while we locate a candidate," which I found odd. 2 more years went by before I heard any news, and that came from a pirate that visited. He laughed at my predicament and I was impotent to do anything about it or harm him unless he harmed me first. Finally, Kickle visited the island. The bastard charged me a king's ransom to deliver my message, but deliver it he did. A month later I got a response that a replacement will be sent out shortly. Kickle chuckled at this part. Except it never came. I asked. Except it never came, correct. By this time I had pieced together some of what was going on and who was behind my exile. It was my older half-brother. I never learned the why though, and soon no more Legion ships arrived at the shores of Hylity. Even the pirate ships dried up as it wasn't even a good place to stop and restock supplies, leaving me alone with nothing but time and booze to soothe my mind. So you want revenge against this brother, is that it? Barkos shook his head. What would be the point? I get nothing out of killing him, except maybe a swift execution afterward. I even gave up my position within the Legion, so now I am no longer tied to a Legion that abandoned me for a decade to rot. I just wanted off that damn island. You can't imagine how torturous it was to hear the same jokes day in and day out for 10 fucking years. I would have jumped off the island 7 years ago if I had been physically able to do so and not stopped by my oath. I had to do a double take as what Barkos said sunk in. The man burst out laughing. Oh man, you should have seen your face, that was worth getting off the island by itself, he said, sucking down the last of his bottle. Kickle was also chuckling. So, was that all true or all bullshit? I grumbled. All true, the man said with a burp, all except the joke part. Could you imagine how conceited I would have to be to consider suicide because of something like that? Fuck no, I wanted off because the alcohol and company sucked. You try being around people for 10 years that have all given up on life. It's fucking depressing. Okay, so you're off the island, why stick with me? Oh, that's easy. I expect you are going to make some huge waves and I want to be around to get in on the action. I'm a bit of a thrill seeker if you hadn't guessed by my level, he replied with a wink. I groaned, eliciting another round of laughter. Fine, as long as I don't get pulled into some scheme to topple the Protectorate, you can remain aboard. I got enough shit to worry about without that becoming a reality. Barkos chuckled. No worries there. I wouldn't want to rule those shitheads anyway, I never was much for politicking. Gimme a blade and point me where you want me to stick it and I'll be happy. I nodded as I tuned Barkos and Kickle out as they chatted about old times. So far the crew was working out, but I knew we could use at least one more crew member. The problem is I had no clue where to get one. I suppose Barkos or Kickle might know, seeing as they are knowledgeable about the area and probably know people that would be interested and not cause issues. We still need one more crew member, got anyone to recommend? The two stopped their conversation and looked at me in consideration. What about Dahlia? Barkos asked Kickle. He shook his head, killed by pirates. Vashus is still alive though. Barkos winced. Yeah, hard pass on him, he's a psychopath. The two went back and forth, naming half a dozen people before they settled on one name. A female Elixian by the name of Emma. I had to ask what an Elixian was. Apparently, they were a semi-gelatinoid race. Again I needed clarification on what the hell a semi-gelatinoid was. While the Elixian had a gelatinous outer body, they still had bones of a sort. This limited the forms they could take, but this Emma was said to be a highly sought-after spy as she could change her appearance to match most humanoid species. The two didn't say if this was due to her class or her race though. I asked the next logical question. Okay, if she is so good at blending in, how the hell are we going to find her? That should be easy enough, I can contact my old captain from when I was in the Legion. He owes me a favor and should know where Emma is currently working, and also her cover identity. You sure he's going to hand that over since you no longer work for the Legion? Barkos shrugged, he won't know that yet. I will send out a message to him at the next port. Somehow I doubted this was going to turn out as quick and easy a process as it was when we retrieved Shastis, but I kept those thoughts to myself. We arrived at the next port and Barkos sent off his message. This was different process than the message plates I had used in the past, more along the lines of a FaceTime request through a mirror. That reminded me, I still had that broken mirror from when the dwarves had attacked me. Kickle said it was the same sort of item but was useless without the counterpart fragments. Well, not useless, but you would only be able to communicate with those other fragments. I decided to take a hard pass on that, not wanting any of those dwarven remnants to know I was still about and kicking. I did head onto the deck when I had a minute and simply dumped the mirror overboard and into the ocean. If they hadn't tracked me down with it yet, they probably wouldn't, but it was better to be safe than sorry. I didn't fear them coming after me, I just didn't need the additional headache at the moment. We remained in the port for 3 days before Barkos received a reply. His old commander said if he wanted to talk, that he had to meet at the Legion stronghold he was currently commanding. Feels a bit fishy, I said flatly. Probably is, Barkos replied. Any other way to find this woman? I asked. Nope, not if you want to find her this decade anyway. Besides, I can handle my old captain. As long as you two can handle the ship, we should be fine. I set the device I had been tinkering with down on the galley table. And if they force my hand? Barkos shrugged, do what you have to do, Captain. I frowned slightly, this woman better be worth all this damn trouble. She will be, I worked with her in the past and she's good at what she does, Barkos replied with conviction. Barkos isn't wrong, Captain. She may be a spy by trade but she is loyal as long as she is treated right, Kickle added. I wanted to bring up the fact that she was like the 14th name they had discussed but decided not to open that conversation. As with Kaihal and Barkos, I would reserve judgment. I just wish they didn't make it so damn hard. I only grunted in affirmative as Kickle left the room to prep the ship. The trip to the Legion base was through a dense area of small floating rocks, almost like dense asteroids. There was no real way to bypass the area on this side of the Isles. It extended down toward the ocean surface and farther into the sky than the Retribution was capable of flying without solid ground underneath. And the rocks were too small to give the ship any added lift to maneuver above the debris field. This was made all the more difficult as the rocks tended to move and collide with others. Oh, and did I mention, we got to this field of rocks just as the mist was rolling in. Yay us! It was slow going, to say the least. The shields got a workout though as there were always a few pebbles bouncing off of it along our path. The only advantage we had was the fact that the Retribution was quite a bit smaller than most airships. It was also sleeker, allowing us to slip between rocks with large gaping holes in them. We did get attacked by a flock of large pterodactyl-like birds called chikas at one point. But they were rather low-level beasts and the weapons aboard Retribution were enough to kill a few and chase the others off. The entire trip took 2 weeks and during that time the fog had rolled in and out 3 times, slowing our progress with each wave. I didn't know how Kickle dealt with the stress. I wasn't even piloting and I was a nervous wreck. Finally, we cleared the field and saw the Legion base's island in the distance. It was like being in the eye of a rocky hurricane but I could understand the reasoning for building a base in such an inhospitable place. Especially if you wanted to protect something important. Barkos had never been to this base, so he didn't know what was so important about it, not that it mattered. Through the command room's view, I could see over 20 Legion vessels patrolling the space around the island. As we came around the island, 3 of the smaller ships shadowed us. I hadn't seen these types of vessels before so I asked Barkos about them. What kind of airships are those? He looked over and quirked an eyebrow. I'm not sure. Fast attack ships maybe, they weren't around the last time I was aboard a Legion vessel. As we got closer, I got a better look at the ships. They were a double-deck design, with the second deck being the top deck. I only counted 16 guns out of each side of the vessel, making them considerably less armed than any pirate ship we had encountered so far. But gone was the easily visible balloon used on most ships of the Protectorate I had seen so far. They also didn't sport the smokestacks of the Jerboan vessels. I could tell the wood was armored in some sort of metal though. Thinner than the plates that made up the Retribution's armor but it made sense if it was just to absorb the initial impact, the wood would do the rest. There was also a slight blue glow emanating from under the ship but it was hard to see unless you were close enough. It almost resembled heat waves but in reverse. I assumed it was caused by whatever enchantments they had used to replace the standard balloon. I found the design quite fascinating, a cross between a large sailboat and an internal combustion-powered ship. The closest thing to my ship that I had seen so far. As we got closer to the massive port set within a large cove I could see why the place was so secure. It was a massive shipyard. Enormous cannons, mounted at the entrance to the cove tracked the Retribution as we made our way inside. I didn't even want to consider what would have happened if we flew over the island or under it, it didn't seem like the Legion was taking any chances here. I assumed they only let us get this far without challenging us because they knew we were coming, or I hoped that was why. After seeing the guns, I wanted to turn around, but seeing all the ships, I'm not sure how far we would get without the mist to cover our escape. Also, Barkos had a bored expression on his face so I figured if he didn't feel it was an issue, then neither should I. Except I did and my hackles were all the way up. But we were locked in now. I did run escape scenarios through my mind as we approached, and none were very encouraging. There was one possibility, I just hoped it wouldn't come to that as I hadn't tested the ship for those conditions. Chapter 198, Legion. We docked at an open slip, not that we had much of a choice where we docked. The 3 ships that followed us in, shepherded us to a specific area in the docks. When we arrived there were 8 gruff-looking men in white uniforms standing along the dock with 2 individuals at the end of the dock, wearing white as well, but piped in black trim. I assumed that meant they were of a higher rank. I saw Barcos cock a smile when he spotted those 2 men and he practically jumped from his chair and raced to the top deck before the ship even settled. I got to watch him jump from the deck, landing in front of the first honor guard, startling the man enough to make him reach for his weapon. Barcos didn't bother acknowledging the man as he swiftly walked past the 8 and towards the other 2. He opened up his arms for what looked like a hug, seeming to surprise the 2 men, before he hauled his arm back and socked one of them right in the nose. I groaned as all hell broke loose on the dock and all 8 of the honor guard tackled Barcos to the ground and put him in restraints. Then they hauled the bruised Barcos up and dragged him away. Fuck's sake, why can't anything be easy, I grumbled. Ship, initiate lockdown protocol Alpha Charlie. Kickle jumped in his seat as the ship responded to my command. This was the first time Kickle got to hear the ship speak as it had been set to silent mode since I had taken him on as crew. Protocol initiated, lockdown in progress. All ship systems are on immediate standby for combat. Onboard crew designated as friendlies. What the hells was that? Kickle demanded, leaping from his chair and looking around. It's the ship. Think of it as a golem. It can accept certain orders from me and carry them out. I would have thought that would have made the Jerboa relax, but if anything it made him tenser. I sighed and explained to him that it was perfectly safe, it was only meant to keep us safe and make sure nobody tried anything stupid, and that was just what happened. As we watched Barcos be dragged away in suppression chains, a group of 4 guards approached the ship. They didn't attempt to board, but they produced odd-looking bags from storage rings and began tossing them into the air to land aboard the deck. I heard Kickle curse. Suppression powder. I didn't know what that was, but I could make an educated guess. Sure enough, as the bags landed on the deck, they burst, dispersing prismatic dust across the deck. I assumed it was designed to counteract security measures. It may have worked if my security measures were enchantment-based or even on the surface, but I didn't need to expose them so blatantly since metal was quite an advantageous conductor for my designs. The ship didn't react in any way to the bags, which was another indication that they had no effect. I didn't want a repeat of what happened with my fortress door. If any system was damaged or disabled, the ship could deploy more aggressive means to remove the threat. After letting the dust settle, one of the soldiers hopped onto the deck. The ship alerted me to a hostile presence and initiated countermeasures. Make sure not to leave your seat. I'm not sure if the electricity will pass through this area or not, but the command stations are insulated. Kickle grimaced and quickly strapped himself back into his seat as a soft whine began to build. Normally the systems would be pre-charged after the ship was set into defensive mode, but with people aboard, Protocol Alpha Charlie prevented that from happening, giving people time to get to a safe spot. Other than the command chairs, only the galley was isolated. The whine quickly picked up as the energy built, and I could feel the static buildup of the electricity as my hair stood on end. I could even see it in Kickle as he now looked to be twice his size as his fur poofed out. The man aboard the deck must have realized something was amiss as he dove off the deck only moments before a crackling arc of white-blue lightning danced across the surface of the Retribution, attracted by the strange powder. The powder glowed and popped as it tried to absorb the energy. I realized what the powder was now. It was crushed mana hearts. The 4 soldiers rushed away from the ship as bolts of energy tore free and sparked against the dock, leaving long jagged scorch marks in their passing. Soon the built-up energy discharged and the ship returned to its standby mode. I looked at the energy readout and saw only 1,000 mana had been used for that action, and the ship was quickly recharging. The soldiers and commander looked on in frustration as we were now at a bit of a stalemate. I could leave Barcos to his fate, but something told me I needed the man, so we were stuck here until he broke free. We would just have to wait. I doubted they could hold a man of his skills long. Barcos had a grin on his face as he was dumped unceremoniously into an office. He picked himself up off the floor and sat in the chair across from the empty desk and waited. It took an hour, but, eventually, his old commander walked in, the bruise still clear on his face where Barcos had hit him. Was that necessary? The man said, rubbing his sore jaw. You left me to rot for 10 fucking years. Of course, it was necessary, Barcos spat. The man sat in the chair behind the desk with a sigh. You know the reasons why and all the political bullshit that was the cause, why blame me? Because, you were my commander, you were supposed to have my back. Yeah, and look what my association with you got me, he gestured around the room. Stuck in some shithole administrative position, watching new ships go to war while I'm forced to remain here, impotent to join them. Yeah, well, you're still an ass. Now, how about you give me the information I came for and I can be on my way. I don't know what made you think I would hand over critical information like that to a former Legion member, yet, word has already gotten around that you quit. What the hell were you thinking? The commander asked. So my brother already got to you, eh? And why would I still serve the Legion after how I was abandoned, political necessity or not? Fuck you and fuck the ruling houses. The commander ignored the tirade as he scribbled on a sheet of paper. You should know, your brother has convinced the houses to demand we confiscate any vessel you came aboard. Oh, what, too afraid to lock me up instead? The commander snorted, as if that would work. Besides, that ship is unique and our enchanters want to study it. Barcos laughed, I want to see you try and take it. The captain is not a man to be taken lightly. You should also know, I have been training him. That made his old commander's pen pause for a moment before it continued. Think of him along the same lines as you do the guild and you may have an idea how dangerous he can be. Now you are just spouting bullcrap. We have obtained a full dossier on this Paul Fuller. He is a lone wolf that has made many enemies despite his short time within the system. He may have powerful enchantments but he is only one man, we will eventually get what we want, even if it takes starving the crew out of that ship. If you attempt to hinder or obstruct our attempts, we have been ordered to place you aboard a prison transport. As the commander finished his speech, he set his pen down and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Now, be a good lad and wait here while I see to your friends. Without another word, the commander got up and left the room. Barcos surreptitiously snatched the piece of paper while scanning the room, only moving his eyes. He spotted a few magical listening devices. So, the commander was under scrutiny. That made the commander's actions more understandable. Either that or the man had completely changed since the last time Barcos had seen him, as he didn't recall the commander being this reckless with his actions. You didn't survive the Isles long by being reckless and short-sighted. Barcos shifted his position to block any easy view of the note as he held it between his legs and read the message. You're a right fool for coming here, you must have known it was a trap. The Admiralty is in your brother's pocket and is watching and listening. Emma is on the island of Gorsh, masquerading as a merchant. I don't know the name she is using, but if you ask for week-old Silicene root she should reply with the phrase, I only carry 2 week-old Silicene. Would you like a stick or a bundle? Your response should be I only need the week-old stuff. I know, convoluted, but that's how she likes to operate. She is a bit on the outs with the Protectorate at the moment due to a failed mission that was beyond her control, so she may be looking to jump ship, as I am assuming you want her to join this crew you are putting together. You have limited time to get to the ship and escape. Word has already gone to the Admiral and ships are starting to make way for the port to blockade any chance of getting away. Good luck also, next time I see you, I'm hitting you back and you owe me a drink for dealing with this mess. Barcos mulled over those words as he made the paper vanish into his ring. He could easily escape this room. Their escape from the island would hinge on what the captain had come up with in the last hour. Barcos smirked as he stood up, knowing it was going to get very interesting very quickly. He was still wearing the suppression cuffs as 2 soldiers burst in and demanded he get on the ground. Barcos chuckled at that as he popped the cuffs off and rendered the 2 guards unconscious and immobile. He whistled a tune as he exited the office and made his way back outside. Chapter 199, Hot Getaway. Kickle and I had spent the better part of an hour watching the soldiers try different attempts to get on board. Thankfully for their sake none of their attempts caused any damage. Although, they had worked out some strange rubberized suits and were starting to put them on to attempt boarding again. By this time 8 ships had entered the cove and were spaced evenly around to cut off any retreat. They even had a few blocking off our escape over the island and below it. Not that that would be a good idea given all the gun emplacements. They even had 3 triple-deck airships blocking the exit to the cove as a backup. I guess I should be impressed that they thought my little ship was this big a threat, but it annoyed me more than anything. I felt the ship jostle and I turned to see 3 men had jumped aboard wearing the rubber suits. I reached over and pressed a button on my console, switching the defense from electric to thermal. Kickle just watched curiously to see what I had done. Like the cooktop to a stove, the armor plates began to heat up. Slowly at first, but then they started taking on an orange glow as they got hotter. The men were hurrying to try and pry the deck hatch open before the heat melted their suits. "Captain, look," Kickle said, pointing to a row of buildings farther up the dock. When I looked, I spotted a disturbance. About a dozen Legion troops were getting their asses handed to them by a lone man. That man was of course Barkos. He beat the last man senseless and ran down the dock as other soldiers fired magic and ranged weapons at him. None of the attacks landed as Barkos ducked and dodged like he had eyes in the back of his head. The remaining soldiers on the dock scrambled to put up a fight, but with the thick rubber suits, they weren't able to hold him up for more than a few seconds. "Ship, disable lockdown protocol Alpha Charlie, and prep for immediate combat departure," I stated, strapping myself in even tighter. "Combat departure?" Kickle asked, watching and copying my actions as he brought up flight controls. "It'll give you 120% thrust and remove any safety locks I put in place to keep us in the air. Try not to kill us and get us to the ocean as quickly as possible," I replied. By this time the errant soldiers had abandoned their attempts at getting in, jumping for safety toward the dock with still smoking feet. Too bad Barkos was running straight for them with a big smile on his face. I winced as the man made 3 quick movements, knocking all 3 men out without even slowing. He jumped onto the deck and I saw his eyes go wide as he danced from foot to foot from the heated deck. It took a lot longer to cool down than it did to heat up. I remotely opened the hatch, another upgrade I added from the initial testing of the vessel, and he sped inside. "Find a chair and strap yourself in, this next part is going to get rough," I said over the intercom. I didn't wait for a reply. "Go," I stated to Kickle. The ship thrummed as we practically leaped out of the docking cradle. Kickle did a rising corkscrew that left my stomach feeling like I had been on the world's worst roller coaster, and we plummeted out of the sky like a dart. "Push it faster!" I yelled as the G-forces shoved me back into the seat. All I got back was a grunt, but the ship rocketed down at its maximum acceleration. "Captain, I don't think I can pull out of this dive at this speed." "Don't pull out, go into the ocean, the ship can handle it." I actually didn't know if the ship could handle an entry into the ocean at this speed, but I hoped it could. Cannonballs were whizzing past us as we fell. I wished I could shunt power to sections of the shield to reinforce it, but they had never been designed to do that, and even an upgrade wouldn't change that at this point. I did make a mental note to design that feature into any future overhaul though. The cannonballs exploded as they struck the surface of the ocean ahead of us, causing waves and sprays of water. This actually helped our cause, as instead of the Retribution slamming into a wall of water, we were only roughly shaken about by Poseidon's kiss. The ship still shook violently, throwing us against our harnesses and breaking my collarbone from the impact. I grunted from the pain but quickly cast healing on me and Kickle as I checked the ship's integrity. It was holding, but some of the locations had turned yellow, a sign that not everything was as it should be. "Keep us below the surface until we're within the rock field," I told Kickle as I unstrapped and made my way to Barkos to see if he needed healing as well. I found him, flopped over unconscious, in one of the flight chairs. He was lucky, the chair had only partly ripped from the wall. I unstrapped him and used Healing Touch as I moved him to another chair and strapped him back in. I doubted our erratic maneuvering was over, and to prove me right, the ship jerked violently as a cannonball exploded in the ocean above. The shield had to be turned off as it wouldn't function for long under the water. Leaving it on would have just drained our power reserves. The same applied to the cloak. The water would just make it useless. That only left the water as a buffer, and I could already feel the ship starting to rise like a bobber. It wasn't like it had ever been built to act as a submarine, and buoyancy was buoyancy. I guess it was preferable to what could have happened. If we had sprung a leak, the ship would have taken on water until the drive systems could no longer compensate for the weight, and we would have sunk to a watery grave. I was so glad that hadn't happened. I sighed in frustration as I hurried to the command room again. My guess is this was going to be a long day. I want to say that my plan was a masterful stroke of genius, that we had got away scot-free, and left the Protectorate ships behind, but that would be a lie. The Retribution surfaced about halfway between the island and the rocky debris field that surrounded it. Despite Kickle's best efforts, we were struck by multiple incoming projectiles as the ship surfaced. The ship rocked as we increased speed, pulling ahead of the smaller, faster ships that were following us. I had chosen not to return fire because I didn't want to make an enemy of an entire country. Not that they weren't already doing a good job of that themselves. If push came to shove, I would retaliate, but the shield was holding and we were getting away. The larger ships were out of position and unable to even attempt to chase us down. Which was good. If they had, we would have been screwed. Even the smaller ships were losing their advantage as we pulled ahead, making it impossible for them to fire a broadside at us while still maintaining their speed. I was glad nobody on their side had realized the usefulness of ball turrets. The retribution plowed into the smaller rocks that floated in the debris field, shoving them aside as we pushed deeper into the cover of the rocks. The enemy ships had slowed significantly, trying to readjust their course and follow our trail. But before they could do that, I told Kickle to angle us behind a larger rock and slow us down so I could engage the cloak. The enemy ships must have realized we were up to something and tried to fire on us. It was a wasted effort on their part as their incoming fire clipped rocks and exploded, sending even more debris tumbling about and making it harder for them to follow. As soon as we crossed behind a larger rock, I shifted the shields to the cloak. Kickle slowed the ship and changed our heading to an almost vertical one, getting us off of the same plane we had entered on. I let out a sigh of relief as I slumped in my chair. Well, let's not have to do that again. Agreed, I heard Kickle reply. I looked over and finally noticed how tense the former pirate captain was. A few minutes later, Barkos strutted into the room as if nothing had happened. Well, was it worth us almost getting killed or captured? I demanded angrily. Barkos had the gall to snort. Captain, if I thought we were in danger of either of those possibilities, I wouldn't have suggested we come here. And yes, I got Emma's location. Before you ask about my method, I owed the man for leaving me stranded for 10 years. Nothing serious would have come from it if he hadn't been under orders to try and seize this ship. Still, I glared at the man, don't pull a stunt like that again unless you inform us first. Barkos finally looked chastised at my words. Well, I would have if I had planned it. As soon as I spotted him, my anger and resentment bubbled up and I just acted. It shouldn't happen again, Captain. Oh, and thanks for not leaving me behind. I grunted in reply and got up from my chair. Kickle, find us a place to stop and rest. Then Barkos can tell you where we need to go next. I'm going to get some food and then get some sleep. I saw Barkos slap Kickle on the shoulder and smile, then I had an evil idea and smiled myself. I stopped before walking out of the command room. Oh, and Barkos, the man turned to me, you are not allowed any alcohol until we reach this next island as punishment. The look on his face was almost worth the entire hassle of this trip and I smiled as I walked out while he tried to cajole me into easing up on his punishment. I just ignored him and told the ship to lock down the alcohol supply cabinet. Other than Barkos's never-ending complaints about being denied alcohol, the trip to the next island was mercifully quiet. That was really the only good thing about it. The island was huge and sported 3 large ports and 4 other cities. It wasn't the capital, but it was among some of the larger floating islands in the Isle of Mist. This posed a few issues. First off, Barkos had no clue which city this Emma was in, only that she was acting as a merchant. Which meant we needed to search every merchant in every city until we came across her. The next issue was monetary. While I had a decent amount of money, if I had to keep the retribution docked for any length of time, that money would be burned through quickly. Luckily the second issue had a simple solution. I had Kickle fly us over the island and find an out-of-the-way spot. He was surprised to learn the ship had its own landing struts. I was surprised to learn that their ships didn't and almost always required a landing harness. Advantage retribution. Then came my next little surprise as I engaged the illusion generator. Alright, the ship should be safe here. As much as I hate to do this, I think when we get to a town, we need to split up to search as quickly as possible. I don't want to spend 3 months on this island looking for one possible crew member. So every day we will meet up after, at a designated spot. Sound good? Kickle nodded, while Barkos was licking his lips in anticipation of finally being able to drink again. I sighed, let's get this done so we can get back to hunting pirates. Support Mana System, hello, world. Complete. Chapter 200, Emma. We entered the first port town without anyone batting an eye. Apparently, it wasn't all that strange to see 2 humans and a jerboa walking about together. At first glance I estimated the city to be about the size of St. June. And while that held true for the size, it wasn't even comparable when it came to the sheer density of people. The city was crowded, making it difficult to even move through the streets with the press of bodies moving one way and the other. I mentally thanked my high stats as the 3 of us pushed through the crowd to get to the market. We had other locations to search, but the market here was the first stop. The market was full of covered stalls and the noise of merchants trying to draw in customers. Surprisingly, it was laid out in a neat grid pattern as opposed to most of the city's wandering paths. The atmosphere was reminiscent of the bazaars but more crowded. While the bazaars were massive in scope, they were so large that overcrowding wasn't much of an issue. I was confused as to why they packed this city into such a tight space instead of letting it grow outward. It wasn't like this island lacked real estate. But then again, there could be all sorts of nasty monsters outside the walls. Or maybe creatures that lived in the mist and only came out when the mist was around. I would have to ask Barkos or Kickle about it later. The three of us split up almost immediately upon getting to the market entrance. We went from merchant to merchant asking for week-old Cilician root. I felt like a complete idiot asking about it, and I got my fair share of dirty glares and uncomprehending looks. This went on for 2 weeks in the first town due to the sheer press of people we had to push through to get to our next merchant, and all that effort was wasted as we did not find the woman. So unless you wanted a lifetime supply of week-old Cilician root, that I had been suckered into buying by one particularly persistent merchant, we came up empty. I blamed my purchase on the man having a skill. As for the root, it was apparently good for marital issues. Although, I would have preferred a small blue pill to the pungent wet dog odor of the hairy root. I didn't bother telling the others as I stashed it away, just in case. I was glad to be done with this location and hoped the next town was a bit less crowded. It turned out to be a small rural town, surrounded by gently rolling hills and small farms. Each farm was surrounded by low walls and reminded me of the European towns from old war movies. It was a nice town, idyllic even, but the people were not very welcoming. Or maybe they were just distrustful of outsiders. It wasn't like pirates couldn't raid interior settlements. Airships made attacking them just as easy as attacking a coastal port. The only risk, being caught by a patrol and having fewer options to escape. Heck, if I were these people, I would be suspicious as well. Who goes to some out-of-the-way farming village looking for a merchant to buy a specific item from? We didn't have to stick around long though. There were only 2 merchants within the village and they both had permanent stores. I was glad for that, as I was sick of getting the stink eye from everyone we passed. Neither of them turned out to be this elusive Emma, so we scratched the second town off our list and headed on to the third one. This one was slightly larger than the last village but lacked the surrounding farmland. Instead, it was situated around a quite frankly enormous inland lake, making freshwater fishing their main commodity. They also seemed to grow a type of lakeweed that had properties similar to tobacco, only stronger and with a slight bit of magic to it. Barkos seemed to light up at that news and purchased a supply of the dried weed and a pipe. "You're not smoking that shit inside the ship," I said bluntly. "What, why not?" he moaned. "Because it'll stink up the entire ship. Smoke it on the top deck if you want, but I'll toss your entire supply overboard and you along with it if I catch you smoking it inside." He grumbled but agreed not to smoke it inside the ship. I took that as a small win, since the chance of me being able to follow through with my threat was small to non-existent. This town was also a bust. They sold fish and the weed and not much else. Everything else they had, came in via caravan from other cities. I groaned at hearing this. It meant we may have to track down these caravans if we couldn't find our target in one of the cities. The other 2 small interior towns were a bust as well. Both were farming settlements, mainly raising livestock. It had been over a month since we started our search and I was getting increasingly annoyed at how hard it was to locate one stupid person. The next port we visited had steep natural cliffs protecting the inland side that formed a V shape as they extended out to the edge of the island. Walls had been erected at the top opening of these cliffs, making the city below impossible to assault from inland without major expenditure. The walls were dotted with large circular towers evenly spaced along the length. I could see cannons poking over the sides of these towers and occasionally I could see people walking along the tops as they patrolled. "What's with the security?" I muttered. "There's a naval base in the city," Barkos replied after overhearing my muttering. "Pirates love to attack naval bases, usually to try and steal another ship. Why not just make it separate from a regular town then?" I asked, but I suspected I already knew the answer and was proven right. It gives the crew a place to unwind after a long time aboard ship. Otherwise, they would just mutiny, and more than one pirate was once a former legionary. I grunted in reply. I could understand the appeal. No more following idiotic rules to please some bureaucrat half-wit halfway around the world. Just freedom and the chance to make a shit ton of money. Although, that meant treason, seizing the ship through mutiny if you weren't the captain, and sentencing the loyal crew to death. But I suppose if you were willing to turn pirate in the first place, those things weren't much of a hindrance to you. It was the 3rd day in this port and I was going over my road opener to merchants when I finally got the desired reply. I stopped and gaped for a moment before I remembered the counter reply. The foxkin woman stared at me for a moment before grunting. Well, follow me. I was so elated at finally finding this damn woman that I didn't question following her into a dark alley. As soon as we were out of sight of the street, she turned on me. In a blur of movement that would have astounded me if I hadn't been training with Barcos, she changed. Her actions still caught me off guard though, as I had been expecting her to be friendly with someone that answered her stupid code phrase. Before I could act, her appendages turned into thick whips and wrapped around my arms, securing them with more strength than I thought possible. I also learned something important that day. If someone or something was blocking where my armor normally went, I couldn't make it appear over my body. There was a large clang as my entire chest piece rattled onto the ground. The woman, who I assumed was Emma, froze as she glanced at the armor. That's not Legion standard. Who are you and who sent you? I didn't want to negotiate with her while being pinned, but it seemed she was using another ability to suppress mine. It made sense, given her profession. I struggled but was unable to break free from her grip. I don't work for anyone. I was looking for another crew member. Barcos and Kickle recommended you. She shoved me against the wall, eliciting a grunt from me. Sounds like bullshit to me. Last I heard, Kickle was dead and Barcos was trapped on Hylity. So the next words that come out of your mouth better be the truth or I'm not going to play nice, she hissed. There was a throaty chuckle from deeper in the alley as Barcos stepped out of the shadows. If he wasn't telling the truth, you'd already been dead, Emma, an easy smile on the man's face but his hand resting lightly on the only dagger he wore openly. She didn't take her eye off me, but her head sort of split and part of it rotated to look at Barcos, sort of how a snail can move its eyes independently. Bah, she spat, finally releasing me and taking yet another form. This time of a slightly older human woman. They finally let your drunk ass off Hylity. Barcos grumbled under his breath, I only drank because there was nothing else to do. She laughed, serves you right for going off the deep end. Now, what's this nonsense about joining a crew? I was kind of in the middle of something here and it's all tits up now thanks to your friend here. I was rubbing the sore spots on my arm as I retrieved my armor. Barcos was explaining our goal and why we needed her while I did the tedious job of reattaching my armor. It could only go onto my body the way it came off, or so I had thought. I guess if it was blocked and I still summoned the armor, it had to go somewhere, but that meant I had to manually put it back on before storing it again. I finished putting it on and restoring it into my ring as Barcos finished explaining. So that's the gist of it, hunting pirates. And you didn't stop to think that what I was doing was important, she glared at Barcos, who had the decency to look sheepish. Well, you're right, this job fucking sucks, let's get the hell out of here. Okay. What were you doing here anyway? Barcos asked as we trailed behind the woman. I took the opportunity to identify her and shouldn't have been surprised at what I found. Julia, seamstress level 14. She wouldn't have made much of a spy if she couldn't hide her identity. I saw her turn to look at me after I used identify. So she had some way to tell I was using a skill to identify her even with my upgrade, good to know. I didn't know where she was leading us to, as she didn't know where we agreed to meet, but after only a few minutes, we unerringly found Kickle. You knew we were here, didn't you? I asked. She snorted. Hard not to when you three blundered about like a herd of brissy. Not a lick of common sense or stealth amongst the lot of you. Three idiots bumbling about the island asking the same inane question to every merchant. Rumors fly faster than an airship. Who needs stealth when you can overwhelm your opponent with skill? Barcos argued. The three bickered back and forth as we left town, leaving me feeling a bit left out since I didn't know the woman or have much knowledge of what they had gone through. So, what's your deal, Captain? Can't say I see what these two fools are so enamored about. I was surprised to be pulled from my thoughts by her question, so I answered as eloquently as possible. Hey! I saw her roll her eyes at me. Why are you doing this? I understand why these two numbskulls are, she stated, jerking her thumb towards Barcos and Kickle. Both complained about her statement, with Barcos being more vocal about it than Kickle, who only gave a half-hearted angry chitter. Emma seemed unimpressed by their anger and continued to look at me, waiting for my answer. You want to know why I'm here in the Isles or here for you? Let's start with why you came here for me. I shrugged. I don't know anyone around here and Barcos and Kickle recommended you. So you just take them at their word, awfully trusting, aren't you? No, I have ways to deal with you if I had to. She chuckled, didn't look that way to me. Her attitude and abrasiveness were beginning to piss me off. Since we were far enough outside of town, I decided to show her a small demonstration. this time surprising her. My armor and weapon appeared, and before she could react, I hit her with 3 back-to-back stunning gusts. It was overkill, as the second one delivered the stun effect I was looking for, but better safe than sorry. The damage was minimal because I just tapped her with the end of my staff, but I think I got her attention. I stood there, ready for a fight as she lay on the ground. Well, I can see you aren't as useless as I thought. Our little display got chuckles out of Barkos and Kickle, who had watched the whole thing go down without stepping in. I permit a lot of leniency among my crew, but second-guessing my capabilities isn't one I'm willing to put up with lightly. You may have skills that surprised me and are good for keeping you alive in certain situations, but I doubt you are a frontline fighter like me. Is this little arrangement going to be a problem for you? If it is, you might as well walk away right now. I waited for her response. She smiled. No, not a problem, Captain, I just needed to make sure I wasn't signing up with some spineless idiot. Not that I thought you were, considering you have these 2 as crew members, but it's always better to get a measure of someone yourself. So, Captain, what is my role amongst this crew? While I was still angry with her, I had to admit she played me rather well to get me to explode. I thought about her question and already had an idea of how to fit her in based on her skills. You will have 2 main roles. Back up for Barkos and me while we board enemy ships and help to sniff out our next target while we are in ports. It would also be nice to know if people are after us given our chosen profession. So more of the same, really. I guess it beats waiting around for months to uncover some made-up BS about a military coup. I'm in as long as everything is on the level. If you start turning pirate, I'm out. I nodded, giving her a hand to help her up. Let's go, we have pirates to catch. On that note, I have just the one in mind. The information came through a day ago about a courier ship being taken out. I can provide the location of the incident, and it shouldn't be hard to find the pirate from there. Why hasn't the Legion gone after them? She shrugged. Somebody probably greased the right hands to keep them off their tail for a week. By then the trail wouldn't be possible to follow. Trail? I asked in confusion. She glared at Barkos and Kickle. Have you 2 not taught him anything? It never came up, Kickle replied. Emma sighed as she rubbed her temples. Did Elixians get headaches, or was she just good at mimicking human tics? Ships leave detectable trails in the monorich air. Wait, is this why we had to hide from that flotilla? I asked Kickle, omitting the part about the ship having the ability to cloak. He nodded. Anyway, Emma continued, these trails are weak at the best of times. And they quickly fade over time. Luckily the mist just went out, so the trail should be fairly easy to follow as long as we're quick about it. Fine. And how are we supposed to see these trails? A passive monocyte skill will allow you to see them. But it only works for very recent trails. You need an active skill to spot them if they are older. And you have this skill? I asked as our walk had turned into a fast jog. Yes, but those 2 idiots should have the passive version at least. Hey, Barkos complained, I just joined the crew, I didn't know the captain didn't have monocyte. It wouldn't make a difference if he did. The skill is blocked by his hull, Kickle added. Okay, let's figure this issue out when we return to the ship, I stated, deciding to end this discussion until later.